This matter is before the court on the parties' joint motion for final approval of the class action settlement. I have reviewed the record and the submissions presented at the fairness hearing. The settlement is fair, reasonable, and adequate under Rule 23, provides meaningful relief.
It's okay. We're all right.
I know. Sorry.
Don't be.
Sarah Mitchell's hands shook violently as she gripped her phone, listening to her husband David's voice break through the line. In her 17 years of practicing family law, Sarah had heard distraught voices before: parents fighting for custody, spouses navigating divorce, families in crisis. But she had never heard David sound like this. "She's not breathing right," David said, his words coming in gasps. "Sarah, I think she took something. There are pill bottles everywhere." Sarah was 40 minutes from their home in Seattle's Laurelhurst neighborhood, stuck in rush hour traffic on I-5 after a client meeting in downtown Seattle. Their daughter Emma, 14 years old and a freshman at Roosevelt High School, had stayed home that day claiming she felt sick, a stomachache. Nothing serious, or so Sarah had thought when she kissed Emma's forehead that morning. What David had just discovered would shatter their family into pieces and launch them into a legal battle that would make headlines across the country and ultimately change how we think about social media's responsibility to protect children. "I called 911, David continued, and Sarah could hear the sirens in the background now. "They're almost here. But Sarah, you need to get here. Now." "I don't know if she's going to." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah didn't remember much about the drive home. She didn't remember the other drivers she honked at, or the red light she might have run. She didn't remember abandoning her silver Volvo illegally parked 2 blocks from their house when traffic made it impossible to reach their street. She only remembered running faster than she thought possible for a 42-year-old woman who hadn't exercised regularly in years, and arriving just as paramedics were loading Emma's unconscious body into an ambulance. Emma's face was gray. Her lips had a bluish tint that Sarah would see in nightmares for years afterward. Her 14-year-old daughter, who just that morning had been complaining about a math test, looked like she was dying. "Is she alive?" Sarah gasped to the nearest paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes who was checking Emma's vital signs. "Barely," the paramedic said grimly, not sugarcoating the situation. "Her heart rate is weak and irregular. We need to go. Now. Are you the mother?" "Yes. You can ride in front. Let's move." David appeared beside Sarah, his face pale and his eyes red. "I found her on the bathroom floor," he said as they climbed into the ambulance. There were 47 bottles, Sarah, 47. Tylenol, Advil, her old prescription antibiotics, everything from the medicine cabinet. How did we not notice she was collecting them? At Harborview Medical Center's emergency room, doctors immediately began emergency treatment. They pumped Emma's stomach, a brutal process Sarah could hear from the hallway. They administered activated charcoal to absorb whatever toxins remained in Emma's system. They ran blood tests to determine exactly what medications she had taken and in what quantities. They monitored her heart, which kept showing irregular rhythms that made the machines beep in alarming pattern. For 6 hours, Sarah and David sat in a waiting room with yellow walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs, not knowing if their daughter would survive. David called his parents in Portland. Sarah called her sister in Boston. Neither of them could bring themselves to call Emma's grandparents on Sarah's side. Not yet, not until they knew whether Emma would live. Around midnight, Dr. Patricia Ramos finally emerged from the treatment area. She was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and exhaustion written across her face, after what Sarah would later learn was a 14-hour shift. "She's stable," Dr. Ramos said, and Sarah felt her knees literally buckle. David caught her and held her upright as the doctor continued. "The next 24 hours are critical, but I believe she's going to survive this. We got to her in time." Sarah collapsed into David's arms, sobbing with relief so overwhelming she couldn't stand. "However," Dr. Ramos continued, her voice becoming more serious, We need to talk about what happens next. This wasn't an accident or an impulsive gesture. Your daughter ingested a massive overdose with clear suicidal intent. She left a note. The police have it. She's going to need intensive psychiatric care, and honestly, she's going to need you both to understand that something very serious has been happening with Emma. Over the next 3 days, as Emma slowly regained consciousness in the ICU, Sarah began piecing together what had happened to her daughter, and what she discovered was more disturbing and more complex than she could have imagined. Emma's suicide attempt wasn't the impulsive act of a typically troubled teenager having a bad day. It was the culmination of 6 months of systematic psychological manipulation by social media algorithms that had been specifically designed to identify vulnerable users and feed them increasingly extreme content to maximize engagement and advertising revenue, no matter the cost to the user's mental health or even their life. When hospital staff returned Emma's belongings on the second day, standard protocol was to keep everything until a psychiatric evaluation was complete. Sarah found Emma's iPhone in a sealed plastic bag. David was sleeping in a chair next to Emma's hospital bed, and Emma herself was still drifting in and out of consciousness due to the medications they were giving her. Sarah took the phone to a quiet corner of the ICU waiting room and unlocked it. She knew Emma's passcode. They had an agreement about that, part of the rules for Emma having a phone in the first place. What Sarah saw on that screen would change the trajectory of her entire life. Emma's Instagram feed was an endless scroll of emaciated bodies, teenage girls with protruding ribs and hip bones, thigh gaps so wide you could see through them, arms so thin they looked like they might snap. The captions celebrated starvation. Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Skip dinner, wake up thinner. I'm not hungry, I'm just bored. Don't eat. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled. Every few posts was more extreme than the last. Pro-anorexia content that explicitly encouraged eating disorder behaviors. Before and after photos celebrating dramatic weight loss that had to be medically dangerous. Tips for hiding food from parents. Tricks for suppressing appetite. Ways to make yourself throw up without anyone noticing. She opened TikTok next, her heart pounding. Emma's For You page, the algorithmically curated feed that TikTok claimed showed users content they would enjoy, was video after video about weight loss, extreme dieting, body checking, and eating disorder behaviors disguised as wellness and health advice. What I ate in a day videos showing portions so small they couldn't possibly sustain a growing teenager. Transformation videos, celebrating going from chubby to skinny in disturbingly short time frames. Body-checking videos where girls filmed themselves from every angle, hyper-focused on perceived flaws. Inspiration compilations set to music, making starvation look beautiful and aspirational. Sarah opened Snapchat and found hundreds of selfies Emma had taken and saved, selfies using filters that made her face thinner, her eyes bigger, her skin impossibly smooth and perfect. Selfies that didn't look like Emma at all, but like some computer-generated ideal that no human could ever actually achieve. And YouTube showed searches for how to lose weight fast, extreme calorie restriction, thigh gap transformation, and dozens more that made Sarah feel physically ill. Sarah's blood ran cold as she scrolled through months of content. How had she not known this was happening? How had this occurred right under her nose, in their home, while Sarah thought she was being a responsible parent who monitored her daughter's phone usage? The answer, she would later discover through litigation that would consume 2.5 years of her life, was hiding in plain sight, buried in recommendation algorithms designed by some of the most sophisticated technology companies in human history to identify psychological vulnerabilities in users and exploit those vulnerabilities to maximize engagement, time spent on the platform, and ultimately advertising revenue. Emma hadn't gone searching for pro-anorexia content. She hadn't joined eating disorder communities or actively sought out harmful information. The algorithms had found her. They had identified her as a vulnerable user, a teenage girl insecure about her appearance, someone who could be kept engaged by feeding her increasingly extreme content about weight loss and body image. They had learned from her viewing patterns, from how long she lingered on certain photos, from what she searched for, and what she rewatched. And then, They had systematically fed her the content most likely to keep her scrolling, watching, engaging, even though that content was literally killing her. Emma had been targeted. Systematically, deliberately, by algorithms that Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube had designed with full knowledge that they harmed teenage users' mental health. And it had nearly killed her. As Sarah sat in that hospital waiting room, watching her daughter sleep with tubes running into her arms and monitors tracking every heartbeat, she made a decision that would change not just her family's life, but potentially the lives of millions of teenagers being harmed by social media platforms. She was a lawyer. She knew how to fight. She understood how to gather evidence, build a case, and hold people accountable for the harm they caused. And she was going to sue every single company responsible for what happened to Emma, no matter how powerful they were, no matter how many lawyers they had, no matter how long it took. This is the story of that fight. It's the story of a mother who refused to accept that her daughter's near death was just one of those things that happen. It's the story of internal corporate documents that prove tech companies knew they were harming children and chose profits over safety. It's the story of a groundbreaking legal case that pierced the immunity shield that had protected social media companies for decades. And most importantly, it's the story of a family that survived and a daughter who transformed her trauma into advocacy. But before we get to the courtroom battles and the corporate documents and the eventual settlement that would change tech industry practices, we need to understand how Emma got to that bathroom floor surrounded by pill bottles in the first place. We need to go back 6 months to when everything seemed normal and trace exactly how social media algorithms identified, targeted, and nearly destroyed a 14-year-old girl. 6 months before Emma Mitchell swallowed 47 bottles of pills in a desperate attempt to end her life, the Mitchell family seemed to have it all figured out. Sarah was a successful family law attorney at Miller & Associates, a mid-sized firm in downtown Seattle that specialized in divorce, custody disputes, and adoption cases. She had built a reputation over 17 years of practice as someone who fought fiercely for her clients while maintaining professionalism and ethics, a combination that had earned her partner status at 38 and consistent recognition in local legal publications. David was a senior aerospace engineer at Boeing, working on the 737 MAX program. The job was demanding and sometimes stressful, particularly given the scrutiny Boeing faced after the crashes. But David was good at his work and felt he was contributing to making aviation safer. And Emma was a bright, athletic, socially engaged 14-year-old starting her freshman year at Roosevelt High School in Seattle's prestigious public school system. She played club soccer, participated in the school theater program, maintained a 3.7 GPA, and had a close group of friends she'd known since middle school. From the outside looking in, the Mitchells were living the dream. 2 successful professionals, a beautiful home in one of Seattle's best neighborhoods, a talented daughter with a bright future ahead of her. But as Sarah would later reflect during countless hours of therapy, from the outside looking in is exactly the problem with modern life. Everyone curates the version of themselves they want others to see, and no one talks about the struggles happening behind closed doors until those struggles become catastrophic. Emma had always been a generally happy kid. She had the typical ups and downs of childhood friendship drama in 5th grade, disappointment when she didn't make the advanced soccer team in 7th grade, some academic stress when she struggled with algebra in 8th grade, but nothing that seemed outside the normal range of adolescent challenges. She had always been confident about her appearance in ways that Sarah, who had struggled with her own body image as a teenager in the 1990s, found almost miraculous. Emma wore whatever she wanted without self-consciousness. She ate without guilt or restriction. She looked in mirrors without the critical eye that Sarah remembered from her own teenage years. Like most teenagers in 2020, Emma was active on social media. She had created an Instagram account at 13, which was technically the minimum age for the platform, though Sarah knew many of Emma's classmates had accounts even younger. She had gotten TikTok around the same time, after months of begging because literally everyone at school had it. She used Snapchat to communicate with friends, sending silly photos back and forth with the app's various filters and effects. and she watched YouTube videos, everything from makeup tutorials to comedy sketches to true crime content. Sarah had thought she was being a responsible parent about social media. She and David had established rules. Emma couldn't have social media accounts until she was 13. The accounts had to be set to private. Sarah had to approve all friend-follower requests. Emma had to share her passwords with her parents. No phones in bedrooms overnight. Emma's phone charged in the kitchen after 10 p.m. on school nights and midnight on weekends. Sarah checked Emma's accounts periodically, scrolling through her feed and her messages to make sure she wasn't talking to strangers or being cyberbullied or posting anything inappropriate. She asked Emma regularly about what she was seeing online and whether anything made her uncomfortable. Everything Sarah checked seemed fine. Emma followed her friends from school, some celebrities and musicians she liked, a few soccer players and theater accounts related to her interests, and various accounts related to fitness and healthy living that seemed innocuous. What Sarah didn't understand, what most parents in 2020 didn't understand, was that what users follow is only a tiny fraction of what they actually see on social media. The real content curation happens through recommendation algorithms, sophisticated artificial intelligence systems that analyze thousands of data points about each user to determine what content is most likely to keep that specific user engaged. These algorithms look at what you view, how long you view it, what you engage with, what you search for, what you watch multiple times, even what you type and then delete without sending. And then the algorithms learn. They adapt. They find patterns in your behavior that you might not even consciously recognize yourself. And they use those patterns to curate a feed specifically designed to keep you scrolling, watching, clicking, and spending as much time as possible on the platform. Because more time on the platform means more advertising impressions. And more advertising impressions means more revenue. The algorithms don't care if the content they're recommending is healthy for you. They don't care if it's truthful or harmful or potentially dangerous. They care about one metric above all others: engagement. And as Emma would experience over the 6 months from September 2020 to March 2021, there are few types of content more engaging for a vulnerable teenage girl than content that makes her feel inadequate about her appearance. The changes started subtly in October. Emma began spending noticeably more time on her phone. Not an alarming amount at first. All teenagers were on their phones constantly in 2020, particularly during a pandemic that had made in-person social interaction more limited. But where Emma used to split her time between phone usage, homework, reading, and hanging out with family, Sarah started noticing that Emma's default activity became scrolling through social media. "Emma, can you put your phone down for dinner, please?" became a phrase Sarah said every single evening. Emma would comply, but with increasing reluctance and irritation. "I'm just finishing something," she'd say, her eyes still glued to the screen. "You can finish it after dinner." "But I'm in the middle of..." "Emma, phone down, now." These minor conflicts over phone usage didn't seem significant at the time. Every parent Sarah knew had similar battles with their teenagers about screen time. It felt like just part of raising a kid in the digital age. Emma also began taking more selfies. Like, a lot more selfies. Sarah would walk past Emma's room and see her daughter sitting by the window, where the natural light was best, phone held at various angles, taking photo after photo after photo. She'd take a picture, examine it critically, delete it, and try again. Different angle, different expression, different lighting. "Honey, you're beautiful," Sarah said one evening, watching Emma frown at her phone screen. "You don't need to take 100 photos to find the right one." "It's not about being beautiful, Mom," Emma said with the particular exasperation teenagers reserve for parents who just don't understand. "It's about finding the right angle and lighting. Everyone edits their photos. If I don't, mine look weird compared to everyone else's." "But you're editing yourself into looking like someone else." "No, I'm just enhancing what's already there." "God, Mom, you're so dramatic about this stuff." Sarah let it go. Was it really a problem that Emma wanted to look good in her photos? Sarah's generation had spent hours getting ready and perfecting their appearance before going out, Maybe this was just the modern equivalent? But the selfie-taking escalated. By November, Sarah estimated Emma was taking 50 to 100 selfies per day. She'd take them in the bathroom mirror before school. She'd take them in different outfits. She'd take them with various Snapchat filters that altered her appearance in ways subtle and extreme, making her eyes bigger, her nose smaller, her skin impossibly smooth, her face thinner. Emma started asking questions about the filters. "Do you think I'd look better with a smaller nose?" she asked Sarah one evening, while they were making dinner together. "Your nose is perfect," Sarah said immediately. "Why would you even think about changing your nose?" "I don't know. It just looks so much better with the filter." "See?" Emma held up her phone, showing Sarah a Snapchat selfie, where the filter had indeed made Emma's nose significantly smaller and more delicate. "That's not what you really look like, honey. That's a computer-generated image. But it could be what I look like. Like, it's not that different. Just a little refinement." Sarah felt uneasy but didn't quite know how to articulate why. "Emma, you're 14. You're still growing and developing. Your face is going to change naturally over the next few years. Please don't start thinking you need cosmetic surgery to look like a Snapchat filter." "I'm not saying I need surgery," Emma said, rolling her eyes. "I'm just saying the filter looks good." In November, Emma's eating habits began to change. It started innocuously enough. Emma began asking questions about nutrition that seemed like normal teenage interest in health. "How many calories are in this? What's the fat content? Is this organic? Can we buy more vegetables?" Sarah was actually pleased at first. Emma had always been a relatively healthy eater compared to some of her peers who lived on junk food. But this new interest in nutrition seemed like a positive development. But the questions became more obsessive. Emma started reading nutrition labels on everything. She'd stand in the kitchen scrutinizing packages, calculating and recalculating numbers Sarah couldn't quite follow. Emma began making excuses to skip family meals. "I'm not hungry. I ate a big lunch at school. My stomach hurts. I don't feel like eating. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't need to eat dinner with you guys every night." Sarah and David tried to enforce the family dinner rule. Both of them had grown up in homes where family meals were important, and they wanted to maintain that tradition. But Emma became increasingly resistant, and honestly, between Sarah's demanding work schedule and David's bowing hours, it was often easier to let Emma eat separately than to fight about it every single evening. When Sarah did see Emma eat, she noticed her daughter had started cutting her food into tiny pieces and eating incredibly slowly. A single chicken breast would take Emma 20 minutes to consume, and she'd rearrange it on her plate constantly, pushing food from one side to the other. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked during one dinner where Emma was methodically cutting a piece of salmon into pieces so small they were almost confetti. "Yeah. Why?" "You're just eating really slowly. Is there a rule about how fast I have to eat?" Emma snapped. "God, you're watching everything I do lately." Sarah backed off. She didn't want to create an eating issue by being overly focused on Emma's food consumption, so she convinced herself she was being paranoid. By December, Emma had lost noticeable weight. When Sarah asked about it, Emma had explanations ready. "I've been doing more cardio with soccer. I'm just growing taller. So I'm redistributing." "Why are you so obsessed with my weight?" "That's really toxic, Mom. You're not supposed to comment on people's bodies." Emma was right that Sarah shouldn't be making her daughter self-conscious about her body. But Sarah's maternal instincts told her something was wrong, even if she couldn't quite articulate what it was. Emma had also become more isolated during this time. She used to spend time with her friends from school, having them over or going to their houses. But by December, Emma was spending most of her time alone in her room with the door closed. "What are you doing in there?" Sarah would ask. "Homework, listening to music, texting with friends. Why do you need to know everything?" The truth, as Sarah would later discover, was that Emma was spending 6 to 8 hours per day on social media, scrolling through Instagram, watching TikTok videos, taking and retaking Snapchat selfies, watching YouTube content. Her screen time reports, which Sarah didn't think to check until much later, showed usage that would have alarmed her if she'd seen it in real time. Emma's personality was changing too. She had always been a relatively easy-going, cheerful kid. But by late 2020, she was increasingly irritable, anxious, and prone to mood swings that seemed disproportionate to whatever had triggered them. "I hate how I look," Emma said one evening in December, standing in front of her bedroom mirror with tears streaming down her face. "Honey, what are you talking about?" Sarah said, alarmed by the intensity of Emma's distress. "You're beautiful." "No, I'm not. Look at me. I'm disgusting. I'm fat and ugly and I hate myself." Sarah tried to hug her daughter, but Emma pushed her away. "You don't understand. You don't see what I see." Sarah felt helpless. She suggested Emma talk to a therapist, but Emma refused. "I'm not crazy. I just hate how I look. That's not something a therapist can fix." In January 2021, Emma's pediatrician expressed concern during Emma's annual checkup. Emma had lost 23 pounds in 4 months, dropping from 115 pounds in September to 92 pounds in January. At 5 feet 5 inches tall, Emma was becoming dangerously underweight. "Emma, you need to eat more," Dr. Susan Park said gently but firmly. "You're at a crucial age for bone development and growth, and your body needs adequate nutrition." "I'm eating fine," Emma insisted. "I'm just eating healthier than I used to." Dr. Park looked at Sarah with obvious concern. "Mrs. Mitchell, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" In the hallway outside the exam room, Dr. Park was direct. "I'm concerned Emma might be developing an eating disorder. The weight loss is significant, and her attitude about food and her body raises red flags. I'd like to refer her to a therapist who specializes in adolescent eating disorders." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Eating disorder. The words felt surreal, applied to Emma. She's been interested in healthy eating," Sarah said weakly, even though she knew Dr. Park was right to be concerned. "There's a difference between healthy eating and disordered eating," Dr. Park said. "Emma's weight loss is neither healthy nor normal. Please make an appointment with the therapist I'm recommending. The earlier we intervene, the better the outcomes." Sarah made the appointment for 3 weeks out, which was the earliest availability the specialized therapist had. But Emma refused to go. "I'm not sick," Emma said. "Everyone's making such a big deal out of nothing. I'm just trying to be healthier, and apparently that's a crime in this house." "Emma, you've lost over 20 pounds in 4 months. So what? I needed to lose weight. I was getting fat." "You weren't fat. You've never been fat." "That's because you're my mom and you have to say that. But I know what I looked like, and I was disgusting." The argument escalated until Emma was crying and Sarah was fighting back tears of her own, and neither of them knew how to reach the other. Looking back, Sarah would torture herself with questions. Why didn't she take Emma's phone away right then? Why didn't she force Emma to go to the therapist? Why didn't she see how serious this was? But the truth is, Sarah was doing what millions of parents do every day, trying to balance concern with respect for her teenager's autonomy, trying to address problems without making them worse, trying to figure out which battles were worth fighting. And all the while, Emma's phone was actively working against her family's efforts to help her. Because what Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known without access to Emma's actual social media usage data and the algorithms curating her content, was that every single day, Emma was being systematically fed content designed to make her eating disorder worse. Every time Emma viewed a photo of a thin influencer, Instagram's algorithm noted it and showed her more similar content. Every time she watched a TikTok video about weight loss, the platform's recommendation system learned and adjusted her For You page accordingly. Every time she took a selfie with a Snapchat filter and saved it, the app collected data about her appearance insecurities. Every time she searched YouTube for diet and fitness content, the recommendation algorithm created deeper rabbit holes for her to fall down. The platforms were learning Emma's vulnerabilities faster than Emma herself could recognize them, and they were exploiting those vulnerabilities with increasing sophistication. In internal documents that Sarah would later uncover through litigation, TikTok had assigned Emma a vulnerability score of 8.1 out of 10. identifying her as a user whose psychological fragility made her highly likely to engage deeply with content related to body image, dieting, and appearance. That vulnerability score determined what Emma saw every time she opened the app, and what she saw was carefully curated to keep her engaged by exploiting her insecurities. Instagram's internal data showed that Emma had been shown approximately 12,000 pieces of content related to eating disorders, extreme dieting, and body image issues between October 2020 and March 2021. She hadn't searched for most of that content. The algorithm had recommended it to her based on patterns it had identified in her viewing behavior. Snapchat's usage data showed Emma was taking an average of 127 selfies per day by February 2021. Taking a photo, examining it, deleting it, taking another one. She was spending approximately 2.5 hours per day using appearance-altering filters. The app had identified her as a high-value user because she spent so much time engaged with their filter features. YouTube's recommendation system had created what internal researchers called an eating disorder rabbit hole, a pattern where users who watched one video about dieting or weight loss would be systematically recommended increasingly extreme content, creating a feedback loop that reinforced eating disorder behaviors. Emma had fallen into that rabbit hole, and YouTube's algorithm kept her there because she was spending hours per day watching videos that generated advertising revenue for the platform. All four platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube, knew this was happening. They had internal research showing that their algorithms harmed teenage users' mental health, particularly teenage girls with body image concern. They had researchers who warned that eating disorder content was proliferating on their platforms, and that their recommendation systems were actively promoting that content to vulnerable users. And they had executives who saw that research and made a conscious decision not to fix the problem, because fixing it would reduce engagement metrics and hurt the company's bottom line. By March 2024, Emma was in crisis. She weighed 85 pounds, 30 pounds less than 4 months earlier. She was spending 8 hours per day on social media. She had stopped menstruating. Her hair was falling out. She was exhausted all the time because she wasn't consuming enough calories to fuel her basic bodily functions. And she was so deeply immersed in eating disorder content and negative self-talk that she genuinely believed the problem wasn't her eating disorder. The problem was that she wasn't thin enough yet. On March 14, 2021, Emma wrote in her journal, something Sarah would find later and read with a breaking heart. "I can't do this anymore. No matter how little I eat, I'm never skinny enough. No matter how many photos I take, I'm never pretty enough. Everyone else looks perfect on Instagram and TikTok, and I look disgusting. I've tried so hard, and I just can't be what I'm supposed to be. I can't fix what's wrong with me. Maybe everyone would be better off if I wasn't here." The next day, March 15, 2021, Emma decided she would rather die than continue living in a body she'd been taught to hate. She swallowed 47 bottles of pills, and Sarah Mitchell's world shattered. Emma Mitchell survived the suicide attempt by a margin that the doctors described as incredibly fortunate and that Sarah would later understand as miraculous. The combination of medications Emma had ingested should have caused fatal liver and kidney damage. The Tylenol alone. She had taken approximately 60 pills containing 500 mg of acetaminophen each, represented a dose that causes liver failure in most cases. Add in the ibuprofen, the old antibiotics, the allergy medications, and several other pills Emma had hoarded over weeks of preparation, and the toxicity level in her bloodstream should have killed her. But Emma had taken the pills approximately 45 minutes before David found her. If it had been an hour, or even 50 minutes, the outcome would likely have been different. After 5 harrowing days in the ICU, where Emma remained unconscious or semi-conscious while her body fought to metabolize the toxins and her organs struggled to continue functioning, she was transferred to Harborview's psychiatric unit. The psychiatric unit was nothing like the medical ICU. Gone were the constant beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell, and the controlled chaos of nurses checking vitals every few hours. The psychiatric unit was quieter, more controlled, and somehow more disturbing because of what it represented. This wasn't a place you came because your body was failing. This was a place you came because your mind had failed you. Emma was placed on a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold, which Washington state law allowed for individuals deemed to be a danger to themselves. That hold was extended multiple times as the treatment team assessed the severity of Emma's mental health crisis. For the first week, Emma barely spoke. She lay in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling, responding to questions with one-word answers or silence. The psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, explained to Sarah that this withdrawal was normal after a suicide attempt. Emma was processing trauma, dealing with medication effects, and possibly experiencing shame and confusion about still being alive when she had tried so hard to die. Sarah stayed at the hospital almost constantly. She took a leave of absence from her law firm. Her partners were understanding, thank God, and essentially moved into Emma's room. She slept in the uncomfortable chair next to Emma's bed, ate terrible hospital cafeteria food, and kept a vigil that felt both necessary and helpless. David visited every evening after work, bringing fresh clothes for Sarah and trying to maintain some normalcy by talking about what was happening at home. The neighbor's dog had puppies, the cherry tree in their yard was blooming, mundane details that felt surreal in the context of their current reality. It was during Emma's second week in the psychiatric unit that she finally started talking. Really talking. It started one evening when Sarah was sitting quietly in the chair next to Emma's bed, reading through work emails on her laptop that she couldn't really focus on. Emma had been staring out the window at Seattle's skyline, and suddenly she spoke. "I hated myself," Emma said quietly, her voice rough from disuse. "Every single day, I hated myself more." Sarah immediately closed her laptop and moved to sit on the edge of Emma's bed. "Honey." "Let me finish," Emma interrupted, still looking out the window rather than at her mother. "I need to say this or I won't be able to." Sarah nodded, staying quiet. "It started with just wanting to be healthier," Emma continued. "I saw these girls on Instagram who were so pretty and fit, and I thought I could look like that if I just worked at it. So I started following fitness accounts and healthy eating accounts." She paused, and Sarah waited. "But then my feed started showing me more and more extreme stuff. It wasn't just fitness anymore. It was these accounts that posted photos of really, really thin girls, and videos about how to eat less, and tips for hiding weight loss from your parents. And I know I should have recognized that it was unhealthy, but Mom, it was everywhere. It wasn't just one or two accounts. It was hundreds. My entire..." Emma finally turned to look at Sarah, and the pain in her 14-year-old daughter's eyes made Sarah's heart break. "Every time I looked at social media, I felt worse about myself," Emma said. "But I couldn't stop looking. It's like I was addicted to feeling terrible. I'd spend hours scrolling through photos of girls who were skinnier than me, and I'd hate myself for not looking like them. But then the next day, I'd do it again, and again, and again." "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked gently. "Because I thought it was my fault," Emma said, tears starting to fall. "I thought I was weak for being affected by it. All these other girls looked perfect, so obviously the problem was me. I wasn't trying hard enough. I wasn't disciplined enough. I wasn't good enough." Over the following days, Emma slowly opened up more about what she had been experiencing. Sarah took careful notes, trying to understand the scope of what had happened. Emma described how her TikTok For You page had evolved from dance videos and comedy sketches to almost exclusively content about weight loss, body checking, and eating disorder behaviors. "What I eat in a day" videos featuring impossibly small portions. Transformation videos celebrating dramatic weight loss. Body checking videos where girls film themselves from every angle, obsessing over perceived flaws. She talked about Instagram's Explore page, constantly suggesting content from pro-anorexia accounts with names like Thin, Beautiful, and Perfect Body Goals that posted emaciated bodies as aspirational images. She described Snapchat filters that had created an impossible beauty standard, making her face look thinner, her skin perfect, her features more symmetrical. I started to hate how I looked without the filters, Emma admitted. Real me looked wrong compared to filter me. And she talked about YouTube videos that had taught her specific eating disorder behaviors, how to calculate calorie deficits, how to suppress appetite, how to hide weight loss from concerned parents and doctors. The thing is, Emma said one afternoon about 10 days into her psychiatric hospitalization, I didn't go looking for most of this stuff. I didn't type pro-anorexia content into the search bar. The platforms just started showing it to me. Like, I'd watch one video about healthy eating, and then suddenly, my entire feed was extreme dieting content. The algorithm kept giving me more and more of whatever I engaged with. This was when Sarah began to understand that what happened to Emma wasn't just about teenage insecurity or normal body image issues. Something more systematic and more deliberate had occurred. Sarah asked Emma if she could look through Emma's phone. Really, look through it this time, with Emma explaining what she was seeing. Emma agreed, and they spent several hours going through each app together. On Instagram, Emma showed Sarah how the recommendation algorithm worked. See, when I view a photo of a thin influencer, Instagram notes it. Then my feed starts showing me more content like that. The more I engage with it, the more the algorithm gives me. Emma demonstrated by scrolling through her feed. Photo after photo of extremely thin women, pro-anorexia quotes. Diet tips that were essentially starvation advice. How many of these accounts did you actively choose to follow? Sarah asked. Maybe 20%, Emma estimated. The rest are just recommended in my feed or on my Explore page. I didn't ask to see them. Instagram decided I would engage with them. So it kept showing them to me. On TikTok, the pattern was even more extreme. Emma's For You page was video after video about weight loss, calorie restriction, and body image. TikTok's algorithm is really good at figuring out what keeps you watching, Emma explained. Once it realized I was interested in weight loss content, it basically stopped showing me anything else. Sarah felt sick to her stomach as she watched. The content wasn't even subtle. Many of the videos were explicitly promoting eating disorder behaviors, just using coded language that apparently slipped past whatever content moderation the platforms were doing. Snapchat was a different kind of disturbing. Emma showed Sarah the hundreds of selfies she had saved over the past 6 months. Photo after photo of Emma's face, slightly different in each one, but all filtered to look thinner, more perfect, less like real Emma. I took like 100 selfies every day, Emma admitted. I'd tried different angles and different filters, trying to find the one where I looked okay. But I never looked okay. There was always something wrong. YouTube's recommendation algorithm had created what Emma called a rabbit hole of eating disorder content. Once you watch one video about dieting, YouTube recommends 10 more. Then you watch one of those, and it recommends more extreme versions. Before you know it, you're watching videos that are basically instructions for developing anorexia. As Sarah listened to Emma describe her experience, she started to realize that this wasn't just about Emma making bad choices or having low self-esteem. Emma had been systematically targeted by algorithms designed to identify her vulnerabilities and exploit them. Did you know that was happening? Sarah asked. Did you realize the algorithms were manipulating what you saw? Not really, Emma admitted. I mean, I knew the feeds were personalized, but I didn't understand how much they were being curated specifically to keep me engaged. I thought I was just seeing what everyone else was seeing. Dr. Rodriguez, Emma's psychiatrist, confirmed what Sarah was beginning to understand. What Emma experienced is increasingly common among teenage girls, Dr. Rodriguez explained, during a family meeting about Emma's treatment plan. Social media platforms use sophisticated algorithms to determine what content each user sees. For vulnerable teenagers, particularly girls with body image concerns, these algorithms often recommend content that exacerbates their insecurities because that content generates high engagement. So the platforms know this is happening. Sarah asked. There's extensive research showing they know, Dr. Rodriguez said. Instagram's own internal research, which has been leaked to the press, shows that the platform makes body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Similar research exists for TikTok and other platforms. They understand the harm their products cause. Then why don't they stop it? David asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Because harm reduction would likely reduce engagement metrics, Dr. Rodriguez said bluntly. These companies make money from advertising. More engagement means more ad impressions, which means more revenue. The business model is fundamentally at odds with user well-being, particularly for vulnerable populations like teenagers. Sarah felt rage building inside her, a cold, focused fury that she recognized from her work as a family law attorney when she encountered parents who had abused or neglected their children. This was that same feeling. Someone had harmed her child, and there needed to be accountability. Can we sue them? Sarah asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked surprised. The platforms? I don't know. That's outside my area of expertise. But I do know that many families have tried, and most have been blocked by something called Section 230, a federal law that protects platforms from liability for user-generated content. Emma didn't generate this content, Sarah said. The algorithms did. They actively recommended harmful content to my daughter. That's an interesting legal distinction, Dr. Rodriguez said. You might want to talk to an attorney who specializes in this area. Over the next 2 weeks, as Emma progressed in her treatment and prepared for discharge, Sarah began researching in earnest. She read everything she could find about social media algorithms, eating disorders in teenagers, and previous lawsuits against tech companies. What she found was disturbing. Instagram's internal research, leaked by whistleblower Frances Haugen in late 2021, though some of it was available earlier, showed that Facebook, Meta's parent company, knew Instagram was harmful to teenage girls and chose not to fix the problem. One leaked document stated, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." 1 in 3 teen girls! Another showed that 13% of British users and 6% of American users traced their suicidal thoughts to Instagram. Research on TikTok showed the platform used incredibly sophisticated algorithms to identify vulnerable users and keep them engaged. The For You page wasn't random. It was carefully curated based on thousands of data points about each user's psychology and behavior patterns. Studies on Snapchat documented the phenomenon of Snapchat dysmorphia. Users seeking cosmetic surgery to look like their filtered selfies, because the filters had distorted their perception of how they should look. And YouTube's recommendation algorithm had been documented creating rabbit holes on numerous topics, including eating disorders, where users who watched one video on a topic would be systematically recommended increasingly extreme content on the same topic. Perhaps most infuriatingly, Sarah learned that all of these platforms had internal research warning about these harms, and that executives at each company had seen that research and chosen not to implement fixes that would reduce engagement. It was during Emma's 3rd week in the psychiatric unit that Sarah made her decision. "I'm going to sue them," Sarah told David one evening as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. "All of them. Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube. They knew their platforms were harming kids like Emma, and they chose to do nothing. Someone needs to hold them accountable." "Do we have a case?" David asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I'm going to find out." On March 28, 2021, Emma was discharged from Harborview's psychiatric unit after a 21-day stay. She was enrolled in an intensive outpatient program for eating disorders, 5 days a week of group therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, and nutritional counseling, with the possibility of stepping up to residential treatment if she didn't make progress. Sarah took a 3-month leave of absence from her law firm to focus entirely on Emma's recovery. She drove Emma to therapy appointments, prepared structured meals, and sat with Emma through every difficult bite, removed all mirrors from Emma's bedroom, except one small one needed for basic grooming, and confiscated all of Emma's electronic devices. That last decision sparked the biggest fights. "You're punishing me for being sick," Emma screamed during one particularly brutal argument. "Everyone has social media. I can't talk to any of my friends. You're ruining my life." "Those platforms nearly killed you," Sarah said, trying to stay calm even as her heart broke at Emma's distress. "I'm not giving them another chance to finish the job. It wasn't the platform's fault. It was my fault for being weak and stupid." "No," Sarah said firmly. "What happened to you was not your fault. Those companies designed their algorithms to exploit teenage vulnerabilities. You were targeted, Emma. Systematically targeted." But Emma couldn't hear that yet. She was deep in eating disorder recovery, which meant her brain was still rewiring itself, and her emotions were raw and overwhelming. The idea that external forces had contributed to her illness was too abstract. Emma's eating disorder told her that everything was her personal failure. It would be months before Emma could really understand and accept what had been done to her. While Emma focused on recovery, Sarah focused on finding an attorney willing to take on what seemed like an impossible case. The first attorney Sarah contacted was a friend from law school, who now specialized in product liability. Sarah explained the situation over coffee at a Starbucks near the courthouse, laying out everything she'd learned about algorithms and internal research in Emma's experience. Her friend listened sympathetically, then shook her head. "Sarah, I understand why you want to do this, but you need to understand the legal obstacles. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act essentially gives platforms immunity for content posted by their users. Courts have interpreted that immunity very broadly. Trying to sue Instagram for hosting eating disorder content is basically a non-starter." "But I'm not suing them for hosting content," Sarah argued. "I'm suing them for actively recommending that content to Emma. The algorithm made a choice about what to show her." "That's actually an interesting legal theory," her friend admitted. "The algorithm as product design rather than content moderation. But I still think you'd face huge challenges. These companies have unlimited resources and armies of lawyers. They'll fight this at every stage." "I know," Sarah said, "but someone has to try." Her friend gave her the names of 3 attorneys who might be willing to consider the case. Sarah contacted all 3. 2 of them declined after initial consultations, citing Section 230 as an insurmountable barrier. The 3rd attorney, Robert Martinez, was different. Robert was 48 years old, a product liability attorney who had spent his entire career going after companies that made defective or dangerous products. He'd sued automobile manufacturers over design defects that caused injuries. He'd taken on pharmaceutical companies over drugs with inadequate warnings. He'd won settlements against consumer products companies whose products harm children. But he'd never sued a tech company. Sarah met with Robert in his office in downtown Seattle on April 23, 2021. His office was unpretentious, cluttered with case files and legal texts, decorated with photos of his wife and 3 kids, no expensive art or mahogany furniture meant to intimidate. Sarah spent 2 hours walking Robert through everything: Emma's suicide attempt, the hospitalization, the social media content Emma had been viewing, the research Sarah had done about algorithms, and internal company documents. Robert listened carefully, taking notes on a legal pad and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Tell me more about how the algorithms work," Robert said. "You're saying they didn't just host content Emma searched for, they actively recommended content to her?" "Exactly," Sarah said. Emma didn't go to Instagram and type pro-anorexia content into the search bar. Instagram's algorithm noticed that Emma lingered on photos of thin women, and it started showing her more content like that. The more she engaged with it, the more extreme the recommendations became. Same pattern on TikTok, YouTube, all of them. "And you believe the companies knew this was happening?" Internal research from Meta shows they absolutely knew Instagram was making body image issues worse for teenage girls, Sarah said, pulling out printouts of news articles about leaked documents. They had data showing the harm, and executives made conscious decisions not to fix the problems because it would reduce engagement metrics. Robert studied the documents, his expression growing more serious. "Here's what I'm thinking," Robert said after a long pause. "The traditional Section 230 defense is that platforms can't be held liable for content created by third parties. But that defense assumes the platform is just a passive host, like a bulletin board, where anyone can post anything. Right, Sarah said. But these platforms aren't passive hosts, Robert continued. They're making active decisions about what content to show to which users through their recommendation algorithms. Those algorithms are the platform's own technology, their own product design. So if we can frame this as a product liability case about defective algorithmic design rather than a content moderation case, we might be able to get around Section 230. Sarah felt hope flicker for the first time since Emma's suicide attempt. You think we have a case? I think we might, Robert said carefully. But I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. These companies, Meta, ByteDance, Snap, Google, have essentially unlimited resources. They employ thousands of lawyers. They will fight this case with everything they have. Discovery will be brutal. They'll try to find every possible alternative explanation for Emma's eating disorder, family dynamics, peer pressure, genetics. And I understand, Sarah said. They'll also try to wear you down with procedural fights and delays. This kind of litigation can take years. And even with a strong case, there's no guarantee we'll win. Section 230 is a powerful legal shield, and most courts have interpreted it very broadly in favor of platform. But you think it's worth trying? Sarah asked. Robert nodded slowly. I think someone needs to try. These companies have been hiding behind Section 230 for too long, and they've been harming kids with no accountability. If we can punch a hole in that immunity shield, even a small one, it might open the door for other families. So you'll take the case? Let me do 2 weeks of research first, Robert said. I want to really dig into the case law on Section 230 and product liability to make sure I can build a viable legal theory. If I think we've got a shot, I'll take it on contingency. You won't pay me anything unless we win or settle. 2 weeks later, Robert called Sarah with news. I think we've got a case, he said. I've been researching Section 230 jurisprudence, and while most courts have interpreted it broadly, there are some cracks in the immunity shield. A few cases have held that the immunity doesn't extend to a platform's own conduct, meaning their own design decisions and features. So, how do we use that? Sarah asked. We frame this as a product liability case about defective design, Robert explained. We argue that the recommendation algorithms are a product feature designed and operated by the platforms, and that those algorithms are defectively designed because they target vulnerable users with harmful content. We also argue failure to warn. The platforms knew their algorithms harmed teenage users and failed to adequately warn parents or implement safeguards. Robert had also brought in Michelle Shen, an attorney who specialized in tech litigation and had followed Section 230 cases for years. Together, they outlined the legal strategy. The lawsuit would name 4 defendants. Meta Platforms Inc., owner of Instagram. ByteDance Limited, owner of TikTok. Snap Inc., owner of Snapchat. Google LLC, owner of YouTube. The legal claims would include product liability, design defect and failure to warn, by negligence, fraud and fraudulent concealment, violations of Washington State Consumer Protection Act. The key, Michelle explained during a strategy meeting in early June, is proving that the algorithms are the platform's own conduct rather than just organizing third-party content. We need to show that these systems actively make decisions about what to show to whom, that they're specifically designed to maximize engagement, even when that means promoting harmful content, and that the companies knew about the harm and chose not to fix it. Over the next 6 weeks, Robert and Michelle worked on building the case file. They interviewed Emma multiple times, documenting her social media usage patterns, the content she had been shown, and the progression of her eating disorder. They collected expert declarations from psychologists who could speak to how algorithms affect adolescent mental health, technology ethicists who understood how recommendation systems work, and eating disorder specialists who could explain the medical causation between social media exposure and anorexia. They researched similar cases that had been filed against tech companies, studying which arguments had succeeded and which had failed. They analyzed Section 230 case law, looking for precedents that might support their theory that algorithmic recommendations weren't protected by immunity. And they gathered every piece of publicly available information about the defendants' internal research on how their platforms affected teenage users. By mid-June, they were ready to file. On June 18, 2021, exactly 3 months after Emma's suicide attempt, Robert and Michelle filed an 87-page complaint in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. The case was captioned, Emma Mitchell, by and through her parents and guardians, Sarah Mitchell and David Mitchell VFI, Meta Platforms, Inc., ByteDance Limited, Snap Inc., and Google LC. The complaint told Emma's story in stark detail. It described a healthy, confident 14-year-old who was systematically targeted by social media algorithms, fed increasingly extreme eating disorder content, and driven to attempt suicide. And it alleged specific wrongdoing by each defendant. Meta Instagram used sophisticated AI algorithms to identify Emma as a vulnerable user based on her engagement patterns with body image content, systematically recommended pro-anorexia content, extreme diet advice, and accounts glorifying eating disorders. Failed to implement safeguards, even though internal research showed Instagram made body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Chose not to fix known problems because doing so would reduce engagement metrics and harm revenue. ByteDance TikTok assigned Emma a vulnerability score of 8.1 out of 10, identifying her as psychologically fragile and highly likely to engage with harmful content. Used that score to curate her For You page with approximately 8,460 videos related to eating disorders, extreme dieting, and body checking over 6 months. Deliberately targeted vulnerable users with content designed to maximize engagement, regardless of psychological harm. Snapchat deployed appearance-altering filters specifically designed to create dissatisfaction with users' natural appearance, contributing to body dysmorphia. Used addictive design features like streaks to compel obsessive usage. Failed to warn users that filters created unrealistic beauty standards known to cause Snapchat dysmorphia. Internal documents showed company new filters contributed to body image issues, but chose not to add warnings because it would reduce filter usage. Google YouTube recommendation algorithms systematically created rabbit holes where users viewing diet and weight loss content were recommended increasingly extreme eating disorder content. Internal research in 2019 warned that these recommendation patterns were problematic, particularly for teenage users. Executives chose not to implement circuit breaker systems that would stop harmful recommendation chains because doing so would reduce watch time metrics and advertising revenue. The complaint demanded compensatory damages for Emma's medical expenses, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. Punitive damages based on the defendant's knowing and willful misconduct. Injunctive relief requiring the platforms to implement specific safety measures to protect teenage users. Costs and attorney's fees. Within hours of the complaint being filed and appearing on the court's public docket, Sarah's phone started ringing. Media outlets wanted interviews. The Seattle Times, NPR, CNN, and dozens of other outlets were interested in the story of a family suing big tech over algorithmic harm. Other families reached out, parents whose teenagers had developed eating disorders, anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues that they believed were connected to social media use. Please, one mother wrote in an email, if you win this case, it could help my daughter too. Advocacy organizations working on tech accountability issues offered support. Fair Play, Common Sense Media, and the Center for Humane Technology all reached out to express solidarity and offer expert resources. And the defendants' lawyers mobilized for war. Within 30 days of being served with the complaint, all 4 companies filed motions to dismiss, arguing that Section 230 barred the Mitchells' claims, and that the complaint failed to state a valid cause of action, even if it didn't. The motions were aggressive, dismissive, and designed to kill the case before any evidence was produced. Meta's brief called the lawsuit a tragic attempt to blame social media for complex psychiatric conditions with multifactorial causes. It argued that every claim in the complaint is based on Instagram's alleged failure to prevent or remove third-party content, which is precisely what Section 230 prohibits. TikTok's motion stated, plaintiffs seek to hold ByteDance liable for content created entirely by third-party users. This is a textbook case where Section 230 bars all claims. Snapchat argued, even accepting all allegations in the complaint as true, every claim fails because Section 230 provides complete immunity for claims based on the publication or distribution of user-generated content. YouTube's brief was particularly blunt. This case should be dismissed with prejudice. Section 230 bars all of plaintiffs' claims, and even if it didn't, plaintiffs cannot establish causation between YouTube's recommendation algorithm and the complex psychiatric issues their daughter experienced. Reading the motions felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. The defendants weren't just arguing that they should win, they were arguing that the Mitchells' case was so frivolous it shouldn't even be allowed to proceed. But Robert and Michelle were undaunted. "This is exactly what we expected," Robert told Sarah after reading through all 4 motions. "They're trying to bully us into giving up before we even get to discovery. But we've got good arguments, and we've got a judge who might actually listen." The case had been assigned to Judge Catherine Morrison, a federal district court judge with a reputation for being thoughtful, fair, and willing to question established legal doctrines when they led to unjust results. Robert and Michelle spent August preparing their opposition to the motions to dismiss. Their brief made the key argument that would define the entire case. Plaintiffs are not suing defendants for hosting or publishing third-party content. Plaintiffs are suing defendants for their own affirmative conduct in designing, operating, and deploying recommendation algorithms that identified Emma Mitchell as a vulnerable user and then systematically targeted her with harmful content to maximize engagement and advertising revenue. These algorithms are the defendant's own products and defendant's design and operation of those algorithms. The brief walked through each defendant's algorithmic conduct. Instagram didn't just host pro-anorexia content, it identified Emma as vulnerable and actively recommended that content to her. TikTok didn't just allow eating disorder videos on its platform, it assigned Emma a vulnerability score and used that score to target her with thousands of such videos. Snapchat didn't just provide filters, it designed those filters specifically to create body dissatisfaction and failed to warn users about known harms. YouTube didn't just host diet videos. Its algorithm created systematic rabbit holes that pushed users toward increasingly extreme content. These are affirmative acts by the defendants, the brief argued. These are product design decisions, and Section 230 does not immunize platforms for harms caused by their own product design choices. The hearing on the motions to dismiss was scheduled for October 14, 2021. The hearing on the motions to dismiss took place on a gray Seattle morning, with rain streaking down the windows of the federal courthouse. Sarah sat in the gallery with David and Emma, watching 4 teams of high-powered defense attorneys argue that their case should be thrown out without ever producing a single document or answering a single question under oath. Judge Morrison listened carefully to 2 hours of argument, asking pointed questions of both sides. To Meta's attorney, isn't there a difference between passively hosting third-party content and actively recommending specific content to specific users? Your Honor, the recommendation algorithm is simply organizing and displaying content that users have already chosen to post. But it's making choices about what to display, correct? It's analyzing the user and then deciding what content will be most engaging for that particular user? Well, yes, but then how is that not the platform's own conduct? To TikTok's attorney, you're arguing that assigning a vulnerability score to a teenager and then using that score to target her with eating disorder content is protected by Section 230? Your Honor, the vulnerability score is just a way of organizing content recommendations. It sounds like a way of identifying psychologically fragile users, so you can exploit their vulnerabilities for engagement. How is that protected activity? The defense attorneys fought hard, but Sarah could see that Judge Morrison was skeptical of their blanket immunity arguments. On November 30th, 2021, Judge Morrison issued her ruling. Motion to dismiss denied. The 47-page opinion methodically dismantled the defendant's Section 230 arguments. Section 230 protects interactive computer services from liability for information provided by third-party content creators. It does not protect platforms from liability for their own affirmative conduct in designing and operating features of their services. Plaintiffs allege that defendants' algorithms identified Emma Mitchell as a vulnerable user and then actively promoted harmful content to her in order to maximize engagement and revenue. These allegations, if proven true, would constitute defendants' own tortious conduct in the design and operation of their products, not the publication of third-party content. The court finds that plaintiffs have stated viable claims for product liability based on defective algorithmic design, negligence, and fraud. These claims are not barred by Section 230 because they are based on defendants' own conduct, not on the publication or removal of third-party content. Not on the publication or removal. When Robert called Sarah with the news, she cried with relief. They had survived the first major hurdle. The case would proceed to discovery. Discovery in complex litigation is where each side can demand documents and take depositions to gather evidence. For the next year, the case became a war of attrition as Robert and Michelle fought for access to the defendant's internal documents, while the tech companies fought back with everything they had. The defendants claimed algorithm details were trade secrets. They argued that internal research was protected by attorney-client privilege. They produced heavily redacted documents where entire pages were blacked out. They slow-walked document production, claiming they needed months to search their systems. By March 2022, Robert had filed multiple motions to compel, asking Judge Morrison to order the defendants to produce documents they were withholding. Michelle prepared detailed arguments about why the information was relevant and why the defendants' objections were without merit. Judge Morrison was losing patience with the defendants' obstruction. In an order issued April 15, 2022, she wrote, "Defendants cannot use trade secret and privilege claims as a blanket shield against producing evidence of wrongdoing. If defendants' internal research shows they knew their products harmed children and deliberately chose not to implement safety measures, that evidence is directly relevant to plaintiffs' claims and must be produced. The court will review disputed documents in camera if necessary, but defendants will produce responsive documents within 30 days or face sanctions." That order broke the logjam. Over the summer and fall of 2022, thousands of pages of internal documents flooded in, and what they revealed was damning beyond Sarah's worst fears. Meta's internal research. A 2019 presentation titled Teen Mental Health Deep Dive stated plainly, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls." The research showed that 32% of teen girls said Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies. It documented that teenage users experiencing body image issues could trace those problems directly to Instagram's content. Perhaps most damning was an email thread from March 2020, where Meta executives discussed whether to implement changes to reduce eating disorder content recommendations to teenage users. The proposed changes would have made it harder for the algorithm to identify vulnerable teens and push them into eating disorder content spirals. One executive wrote, "The predicted impact to engagement is 3.2%, which translates to approximately $3.80 billion annual revenue. Unless legally required, I don't see how we justify that trade-off to shareholders." Another executive responded, "Agreed. The PR risk is manageable, and Section 230 shields us from legal liability. Recommendation: do not implement." They had known. They had known exactly what their platform was doing to teenage girls, and they had explicitly chosen revenue over safety. TikTok's algorithm documents. ByteDance produced detailed technical documents showing how their recommendation algorithm worked. It assigned every user a vulnerability score based on hundreds of behavioral indicators: how long they watched certain videos, what they rewatched, what they searched for, how they responded to certain types of content. Users with high vulnerability scores, meaning users identified as psychologically fragile, were deliberately targeted with content that exploited their specific vulnerabilities because those users showed the highest engagement levels. Emma's vulnerability score was 8.1 out of 10. The documents showed exactly what Emma had been shown: 47 videos per day on average related to eating disorders, extreme dieting, body checking, and weight loss. Over the 6 months from October 2020 to March 2021, the algorithm had shown Emma approximately 8,460 videos designed to exploit her body image vulnerabilities. This wasn't random. This wasn't Emma seeking out harmful content. This was systematic targeting based on psychological vulnerability. Snapchat's design documents. Internal documents from Snap revealed that the company's appearance-altering filters were designed with full knowledge that they contributed to body dysmorphia. One 2018 memo discussed the rise of Snapchat dysmorphia, users seeking cosmetic surgery to look like their filtered selfies because the filters had distorted their perception of normal appearance. The memo noted, legal team concerned about potential liability if users harm themselves trying to look like filters. Product team recommends disclaimer on filters. Research team tested disclaimers and found 17% reduction in filter usage. Decision: do not implement disclaimers. They had known their filters caused psychological harm. They had known users were developing dysmorphia, and they had chosen not to warn users because warnings would reduce engagement. YouTube's internal warnings. Google produced internal research from 2019 showing that YouTube's recommendation algorithm systematically created rabbit holes on numerous topics, including eating disorders. A user who watched one video about healthy eating would be recommended increasingly extreme content, ultimately leading to pro-anorexia videos. Internal researchers proposed implementing circuit breaker systems that would stop these recommendation chains for users under 18. The proposal estimated it would reduce eating disorder-related harm by approximately 40%. A product executive's response was documented in an email. Circuit breakers would reduce watch time for teen girls by approximately 8%, which is our fastest-growing demographic and highest engagement segment. Recommendation: do not implement. Let legal and PR handle any blowback. Again and again, across all 4 defendants, the same pattern emerged: research showing harm, proposals to fix the harm, executive decisions not to fix it because fixing it would hurt engagement metrics and revenue. As Sarah read through these documents in late 2022 and early 2023, she felt rage unlike anything she'd experienced in her life. These companies had known. They had known they were harming children. They had known their platforms were contributing to eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and suicide. And they had chosen to do nothing, not out of ignorance, but as a deliberate business decision. By spring 2023, the case was progressing toward trial. Depositions had been taken. Expert reports had been filed. The evidence was overwhelming, and the defendants began signaling interest in settlement. The 3-day mediation took place in a conference room on the 42nd floor of Seattle's Columbia Center, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains in the distance. Federal Magistrate Judge Patricia Chen served as mediator, a veteran of hundreds of complex settlements who had a reputation for being tough but fair with both plaintiffs and defendants. Sarah sat at one end of the long conference table with Robert, Michelle, David, and Emma, now 17 years old and preparing to start college the following year. At the other end sat teams of attorneys representing Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube. The room felt crowded with lawyers, paralegals, and corporate representatives whose titles Sarah had stopped trying to memorize. Judge Chen began with ground rules. Everything said was confidential. Both sides needed to negotiate in good faith. and her role was to facilitate rather than impose a solution. "I've reviewed the case file extensively," Judge Chen said. "The internal documents are damning. The causation evidence is strong. You survived a Section 230 motion to dismiss, which is remarkable. But trial is always a risk. Let's see if we can find a resolution." The defendant's opening offer was insulting. $2.50 million total, divided among the 4 companies. "That's insulting," David said quietly but firmly. Robert delivered the Mitchells' counteroffer. $7 million plus binding policy commitments including age verification systems to prevent children under 13 from accessing platforms, algorithmic changes to stop recommending eating disorder and self-harm content to users under 18, prominent warning labels on content related to dieting, weight loss, and body image, mandatory parental controls enabled by default for users under 16, quarterly independent audits for 2 years, then annual audits with public reporting. Judge Chen shuttled between rooms, carrying offers and testing arguments. By the end of day 1, the defendants had moved to $4.20 million and agreed to 3 of the 5 policy demands. But they were resisting parental controls and audits. "They're concerned about proprietary information," Judge Chen explained. "Public audits would expose internal data they consider trade secrets. Without audits, there's no way to verify they're actually implementing the changes," Michelle argued. "We need independent verification." On day 2, Sarah and her family huddled in their private conference room. "What do you think we should do?" Sarah asked Emma directly. "This is your case as much as mine." Emma considered carefully. "I think we should ask for $6.30 million and quarterly audits for 2 years, then annual audits. If they agree, I think we should settle." "Why quarterly audits?" Robert asked. "Because 12 months is too long to wait to find out if they're cheating," Emma said. "If they're not following through, I want to know quickly so we can do something about it." Robert nodded, impressed. "That's smart reasoning." They countered at $6.30 million, with quarterly audits for 2 years, then annual thereafter. They also proposed a compromise on audit transparency. Detailed data could remain confidential, but summary findings would be public. The wait was excruciating. Judge Chen took their counteroffer back to the defendants at 10:15 a.m. Hours passed. Finally, at 1:45 p.m., Judge Chen returned to their conference room. "You've got yourselves a settlement," she said with a small smile. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes instantly. Emma burst into tears. David wrapped his arms around both of them. The final settlement terms. Monetary, $6.30 million total, divided as a Meta, $2.50 million. A TikTok, $1.80 million. Snapchat, $1.20 million. YouTube, $800,000. After legal fees, 40% contingency, plus approximately $180,000 in costs, the net to the Mitchell family would be approximately $3.80 million. Policy commitments. Age verification. Within 6 months, implement enhanced age verification to prevent users under 13 from accessing platforms, including government ID verification for accounts flagged as potentially underage. Algorithmic changes. Within 12 months, modify recommendation algorithms to prevent promotion of eating disorder, self-harm, and suicide-related content to users under 18, including circuit breaker systems that halt recommendations after certain thresholds. On warning labels. Within 6 months, implement prominent warning labels on content related to dieting, weight loss, body image, and appearance, altering filters, including resources for eating disorder support. Parental controls. Within 12 months, implement default parental controls for all users under 16, requiring active parental opt-out with monthly reports on child's usage and content viewed. Independent audits, beginning 18 months from settlement date, quarterly audits for 2 years, then annual audits thereafter, conducted by a mutually agreed independent organization, with summary findings made public. Confidentiality. Mitchell's retained right to discuss the case publicly, including policy commitments and total settlement amount, but could not quote directly from internal documents or reveal individual company settlement amounts. The rest of Day 2 and all of Day 3 were spent hammering out detailed language for each provision, defining exactly what the policy changes required, establishing measurable compliance criteria, and determining what would happen if a defendant failed to meet their obligation. On December 6, 2023, everyone signed the settlement agreement. Judge Chen congratulated both sides. "This is one of the most significant settlements I've mediated, not because of the dollar amount, but because of what it represents. You've held these companies accountable in a way very few plaintiffs have managed to do." As they left the Columbia Center that evening, Emma turned to Sarah. "We actually did it," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "We held them accountable." "You did it," Sarah said, pulling her daughter close. "Your courage to share your story, your willingness to fight, this happened because of you." The settlement check arrived on January 12, 2024. Sarah and David established a trust for Emma's future, college, graduate school, therapy for as long as she needed it. They also established the Mitchell Foundation for Digital Youth Safety with $500,000 from the settlement to help other families navigate litigation against tech companies, and to fund research on social media's impact on adolescent mental health. Emma thrived at the University of Washington, majoring in psychology with plans to specialize in eating disorders and social media-related mental health issues. She maintained her recovery, though she still attended therapy twice a week, and probably always would. She had learned that recovery wasn't a destination, it was a daily choice. She also used social media again, but differently. She followed mental health advocates and eating disorder recovery accounts instead of fitness influencers. She used screen time limits religiously. She checked in with herself after every social media session. "How do I feel right now compared to before I opened this app?" If the answer was worse, she closed the app. Emma had also become an advocate, sharing her story publicly and using her platform, 23,000 Instagram followers and growing, to raise awareness about algorithmic harm. The first independent audit in July 2024 showed the defendants were complying with settlement terms. Hundreds of thousands of underage users had been blocked from creating accounts. Millions of warning labels had been deployed. Measurable decreases in harmful content consumption among teenage users were documented. But the audit also noted concerning patterns: content migration to unregulated platforms, coded language evading moderation systems, and inconsistent international implementation of protections. In November 2024, Sarah testified before a Senate committee considering legislation to reform Section 230 and impose new safety requirements on social media platforms. "Every day you delay taking action, more children are harmed," Sarah told the senators. "You have the power to require that platforms prioritize child safety over engagement metrics. The only question is whether you'll use that power." Sarah's advice to other families, published in an open letter that went viral. Trust your instincts. If your child's mental health deteriorates with social media use, pay attention. Document everything. Screenshots, medical records, treatment costs, critical for potential litigation. Get professional help immediately. Early intervention saves lives. Take social media away, at least temporarily. Your child will resist, but if it's harming them, access must be removed until they're stable. Don't blame yourself. These platforms are designed by experts to be addictive and exploitative. You couldn't have known. Consider legal action, but understand the cost. Litigation against tech companies is expensive, lengthy, and emotionally draining, but sometimes necessary for accountability. Connect with other families. You're not alone. Support groups and advocacy organizations can help. Advocate for systemic change. Individual cases matter, but we need regulation to protect all children. Remember, recovery is possible. Emma nearly died and is now thriving. Hold on to hope. The platforms won't self-regulate. Change only comes through external pressure, litigation, regulation, public outcry. The Mitchell case proved several critical things. Section 230 immunity is not absolute. When platforms make active decisions through algorithmic recommendations, they can be held accountable for those decisions. Internal documents matter. The leaked research from Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube proved these companies knew they were harming children and chose profits over safety. Families can fight back. Despite the power and resources of big tech, ordinary people can hold these companies accountable. Policy changes can be won. The settlement didn't just provide monetary compensation, it forced actual changes to protect millions of teenage users. But Sarah and Emma both know the fight isn't over. There are still millions of teenagers being fed harmful content by algorithms designed to exploit their vulnerabilities. Sarah said in a recent interview, "Our settlement affects 4 companies, but there are dozens more platforms. Every day, more kids are being harmed. This case opened a door, but we need systemic change. Federal regulation with real teeth to truly protect children." Emma, preparing to start her sophomore year at UW, put it this way in an Instagram post that was shared over 100,000 times. "1 year ago, I was a victim of algorithmic harm that nearly killed me. Today, I am a survivor and an advocate. My family held 4 tech giants accountable. We proved that Section 230 doesn't protect platforms from liability for their own harmful conduct. We forced policy changes that will protect millions of teenagers. But our work isn't done. There are still kids out there right now being targeted the same way I was. Still algorithms identifying vulnerability and exploiting it for profit. Still companies choosing engagement metrics over children's lives. To teenagers struggling, this isn't your fault. You were targeted by technology designed to find your weaknesses. That doesn't make you weak. It makes these companies predatory. To parents, pay attention to what your kids are seeing, not just who they're talking to. The algorithms are the threat. To policymakers, stop letting tech companies regulate themselves. They've proven they won't prioritize safety over profit. We need real regulation with real consequences. Change is possible. Accountability is possible. Recovery is possible. Keep fighting. Keep surviving. Keep hoping. Wow. The Mitchell case changed the legal landscape for social media litigation. It provided a roadmap for other families to hold tech companies accountable. It forced 4 of the world's most powerful corporations to implement safety measures they had resisted for years. But perhaps most importantly, it gave voice to millions of teenagers who have been harmed by platforms designed to exploit their vulnerabilities. Sarah Mitchell never wanted to become a crusader against big tech. She wanted to practice law, raise her daughter, live a quiet life. But when Emma swallowed those pills, when Sarah found that phone filled with algorithmically curated harm, she had a choice: accept it as just one of those tragic things that happen, or fight back. She chose to fight, and she won. Now the question is, what will the rest of us do with the door she kicked open? The answer will determine whether Emma's story becomes the last of its kind, or just one of millions more to come.